Eric Voss stepped off the transport shuttle into what could only be described as organized chaos with a doctorate in architecture. Nexus Station stretched before him like a crystalline city that had been designed by committee. If the committee included representatives from 40 different species, with 40 different ideas about basic physics. "Welcome to Nexus Station," announced the holographic greeter, a shimmering blue figure that seemed to be having an identity crisis about which species it wanted to represent. "Please mind the gravity differential in Section C through Q. Avoid feeding the maintenance drones, and remember that temporal paradoxes are strictly prohibited in the diplomatic quarters." "Temporal paradoxes," Eric muttered, adjusting his communications gear. "Great, and here I was worried about language barriers." The station's central corridor curved impossibly upward, defying every engineering principle Eric had learned during his training on Earth. Shops, restaurants, and diplomatic offices lined the walls in a pattern that seemed to follow some sort of multidimensional logic that made his eyes water if he stared too long. First time at Nexus. A maintenance drone floated past, its optical sensors glowing with what might have been amusement. Pro tip, don't try to map this place. The architects were from Rigel 7. They think in 11 dimensions and consider linear corridors quaint. Eric followed the luminescent guide strips toward the human diplomatic section, dodging hovering cargo containers and trying not to gawk at the impossible variety of species moving through the corridors. A family of crystalline beings that looked like walking gemstones shared the walkway with furry creatures that seemed to be having an animated discussion about quantum mechanics, while somewhere overhead, something that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a philosophy professor drifted past in a mobility bubble. Communications specialist Voss, a harried-looking woman in diplomatic blues, approached him, clutching a data pad like a lifeline. "Thank God you're here. Ambassador Chen needs you in conference room 7 immediately. We've got 17 different species arguing about trade routes, and half our universal translators are converting economic terminology into mating rituals." Mating rituals? Eric raised an eyebrow. Should I be concerned about accidentally proposing to someone? Only if you use the Centauri dialect when discussing shipping manifests. Last week, our trade attaché inadvertently offered to bear eggs for the entire Andromedean delegation. Very awkward. Eric followed her through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves based on traffic patterns, past observation decks that offered breathtaking views of the gas giant below. Kepler 442 be swirled with storms the size of Earth's continents, its aurora painting the station's hull in shifting rainbows of light. Conference Room 7 turned out to be a spherical chamber with seating arrangements that accommodated everything from humanoid bipeds to sentient gas clouds. Ambassador Chen, a stern woman with prematurely gray hair and the look of someone who'd been dealing with impossible diplomatic crises for far too long, gestured Eric toward a workstation. "Voss, thank whatever deities you prefer that you're here. The Velnathi trade delegation is threatening to walk out because our translator keeps rendering their commercial proposals as declarations of eternal friendship. I need you to recalibrate the linguistic matrices before we accidentally adopt their entire species." Eric activated his workstation and immediately dove into the translation protocols, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. The universal translators were marvels of xenolinguistic engineering, but they required constant fine-tuning to handle the subtle contextual differences between species. "There's your problem," he announced after several minutes. The Velnathi use tonal modifiers to distinguish between commercial and social relationships. Your translator's defaulting to the social interpretation because it can't parse the harmonic frequencies. Can you fix it? Give me 10 minutes and access to their linguistic database. Eric paused, studying the scrolling text. Though I should warn you, their concept of commercial law is apparently based on an ancient courtship ritual. This could get interesting. As Eric worked, He found himself fascinated by the complexity of Velnathi communication. Their language layered meaning through tonal variations, harmonic resonance, and what appeared to be subtle electromagnetic field fluctuations. It was like trying to translate music into mathematics while standing in a thunderstorm. "Testing, testing," he murmured into the calibration microphone. "Commercial proposal, subsection 14, regarding shipping lane allocation." The translator's response came back crisp and clear. "Trade route designation 14, concerning the distribution of cargo pathways among registered commercial entities." Perfect. No marriage proposals, no adoption ceremonies, no accidental declarations of war. Eric leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. Though I have to say, any species that builds romantic poetry into their business contracts has my respect. "Excellent work," Ambassador Chen said, relief evident in her voice. "The negotiations resume in 30 minutes. Why don't you grab some food and familiarize yourself with the station layout? You'll be spending a lot of time here over the next few weeks." Eric made his way to the food court, a vast space where dozens of species shared meals that defied both physics and good sense. He settled for something the menu claimed was approximately chicken and found a table near the observation windows. That's when he saw her. She was standing near the cultural exchange kiosk, studying a display about human art with intense concentration. Tall and graceful, with silver hair that caught the station's artificial lighting and skin that seemed to have a subtle luminescence of its own. Her ears rose to elegant points, the only feature that marked her as non-human, though they somehow made her more beautiful rather than alien. She was also clearly struggling with a malfunctioning universal translator that kept sparking and emitting what sounded like recipe instructions in 17 different languages. "Excuse me," Eric said, approaching with his toolkit. "Looks like your translator's having an identity crisis. Mind if I take a look?" She turned, and Eric found himself looking into violet eyes that seemed to hold depths he could spend years exploring. "You would do this? I fear I have caused the device to become quite confused." "No problem. These things are temperamental at the best of times." Eric examined the small device, noting the burn marks around its frequency modulators. "What were you trying to translate?" "I wish to understand the cultural significance of human sculpture, but the device began instructing me in the preparation of something called lasagna, and offering to teach me 17 different ways to fold napkins." Eric couldn't help laughing. "Well, napkin folding is an important human skill, very diplomatic, but I think I can get it back to art appreciation." He made several adjustments, then handed the translator back to her. "Try it now." She activated the device and smiled, an expression that made Eric's heart skip several beats. "Perfect. It now says that human sculpture represents the triumph of creativity over material limitations. Much more enlightening than pasta recipes. I'm Eric, by the way, communications specialist with the human delegation." "Zara," she replied, her accent adding musical notes to the standard Galactic. "I am with the Velnathi trade mission. Thank you for your assistance, Eric. Perhaps our paths will cross again during the negotiations." As she walked away, Eric realized he'd been staring and hastily returned to his approximately chicken. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, even if he couldn't quite define what it was. Around him, Nexus Station continued its impossible dance of diplomacy and commerce, unaware that a simple act of kindness had just set in motion events that would reshape the balance of power across 3-star systems. 3 days of diplomatic negotiations had taught Eric that the phrase, "lost in translation," took on entirely new meaning when applied to interstellar commerce. He'd successfully prevented 2 trade wars, 1 accidental military alliance, and what would have been the galaxy's first case of corporate-sponsored poetry slams. "Voss, you're a miracle worker," Ambassador Chen said as they walked toward the central plaza for the evening's formal reception. The Andromedan delegation actually thanked us for not accidentally offering to colonize their homeworld in exchange for mining rights. Just doing my job, Eric replied, tugging at his formal diplomatic uniform. Though I have to admit, accidentally offering to terraform someone's planet is a new career low, even for me. The central plaza had been transformed into something that defied both physics and good taste. Floating pavilions drifted in carefully choreographed patterns, while holographic displays showcased the cultural achievements of 47 different species. The effect was like attending a party inside a kaleidoscope, designed by someone with too much imagination and access to anti-grav generators. Remember, Chen warned as they entered the crowd, tonight's about relationship building. Smile, be charming, don't accidentally propose to anyone, and for the love of all that's holy, don't let the Rigelian delegate convince you to try their fermented algae wine. I'm told it causes temporary telepathy in humans. Eric nodded and dove into the diplomatic crush, exchanging pleasantries with species whose names he was still learning to pronounce. The universal translators hummed with constant activity, creating a linguistic symphony that somehow managed to make sense despite, involving everything from subsonic whale song to electromagnetic frequency modulation. He was discussing grain futures with a delegation from the Spiral Arm Agricultural Collective, beings that looked like walking trees with excellent business sense, when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. Eric. He turned, and there was Zara, moving through the crowd with a group of other Velnathi diplomats. She looked stunning in formal robes that seemed to shift color based on the lighting, like fabric woven from captured starlight. Zara, good to see you again. Eric smiled, genuinely pleased. How are the negotiations treating you? Quite well, thanks to your translation assistance. My colleagues and I were just discussing the complexity of human commercial law. She gestured to the other Velnathi with her, an older male with stern features and elaborate rank insignia, and two younger individuals who watched Eric with obvious curiosity. Eric, Zara said, her voice carrying clearly through the ambient noise of the reception, I would like you to meet my delegation partners. This is Senior Trade Advocate Korvac and Representatives Thalen and Myra. The introductions proceeded normally enough, with polite exchanges of titles and pleasantries. Eric was beginning to relax when Zara turned to her colleagues with a radiant smile that seemed to light up the entire plaza. And this, she announced in perfectly clear standard Galactic, her voice pitched to carry to everyone within 50 meters, is my husband, Eric. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Diplomats from a dozen species turned to stare. Someone dropped what might have been a ceremonial goblet, and the crystalline crash echoed through the sudden silence like a gunshot. Eric felt his brain attempt to process what had just happened and come up empty. What now? Zara's smile never wavered, though something flickered in her violet eyes, uncertainty, hope, panic. My husband. The one I have chosen to bond with according to the old laws. I think there might be a translation error, Eric said weakly, aware that he was now the center of attention for approximately 300 beings representing the major powers of the galaxy. The translator might have said sandwich instead of. No translation error, Senior Trade Advocate Korvac said, his voice carrying tones that Eric's newly sensitive ears recognized as barely controlled rage. She has made the Telvanni Corvith, the spouse claim, in front of witnesses. The what claim? Eric looked around desperately for Ambassador Chen and spotted her pushing through the crowd with the expression of someone whose worst diplomatic nightmares were coming true in real time. A public declaration of marital intent, Thalen explained helpfully, though his tone suggested he found the situation more amusing than scandalous. Binding under Velnathi law when made before representatives of 3 or more houses. Eric did some quick math and realized that the plaza currently contained representatives from at least 47 houses, species, and commercial entities. So when you said, Husband, you meant. I meant husband, Zara said simply. Partner in all things, equal in status, bound by choice and law. But we just met 3 days ago. Sometimes the heart recognizes truth more quickly than the mind, she replied, though Eric caught something in her expression that suggested the situation might be more complicated than sudden romantic impulses. Ambassador Chen finally reached them, looking like she was contemplating early retirement. Mr. Voss, I need to speak with you immediately, privately. Ah, yes, that sounds like a very good idea. Eric turned to Zara, who was still smiling, though he could see tension in her posture. We should probably, that is. The Telvanni Corvith cannot be retracted once witnessed, Korvac said grimly. The claim stands until formally dissolved or confirmed. How long do we have to figure this out? Eric asked, feeling like he was drowning in diplomatic quicksand. Traditionally, 1 lunar cycle, Myra said. 28 standard days to decide whether to proceed with the bonding ceremony or allow the claim to dissolve. 28 days, Eric repeated. Right, that's plenty of time to work through any misunderstandings. As Chen began steering him away from the crowd, Eric caught Zara's eye. She was still smiling, but something in her expression made him think that this whole situation might be less about romantic impulses and more about something else entirely. Behind them, he could hear Korvac's voice rising in what sounded like either diplomatic protests or the Velnathi equivalent of swearing. The reception gradually resumed its normal chaos, though Eric noticed that conversations now seemed to involve a lot of pointing in their direction. Chen, Eric said as they reached a quieter corridor, please tell me this is just some sort of cultural misunderstanding that we can smooth over with proper apologies and maybe some nice gift baskets. Ambassador Chen's expression suggested that gift baskets were not going to solve this particular problem. Eric, she said quietly, I need you to sit down. What just happened in there has implications that go far beyond diplomatic embarrassment. That woman didn't just call you her husband. She just made you one of the most powerful humans in known space. Eric sat down hard in the nearest chair, his mind reeling. Around them, Nexus Station hummed with its usual impossible energy, but he had the distinct feeling that his universe had just been turned completely upside down. And somehow, despite the chaos and confusion, he couldn't stop thinking about the way Zara had smiled when she'd said, husband. Like it was both the most natural thing in the world and the most important decision she'd ever made. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Eric said, pacing the length of Ambassador Chen's office while trying not to hyperventilate. By calling me her husband in public, Zara automatically transferred voting rights, commercial holdings, and political influence equivalent to a small planetary government directly to me. That's the simplified version, yes. Chen rubbed her temples like she was fighting off the mother of all diplomatic headaches. The Velnathi Telvanni Corvith isn't just marriage, it's a complete merger of assets, authority, and legal standing. As of 3 hours ago, you technically own a controlling interest in 17 major shipping lanes and have voting rights in the Galactic Commerce Consortium. Eric stopped pacing and stared at her. I'm a communications specialist. Yesterday, my biggest responsibility was making sure nobody accidentally declared war while discussing grain prices. Now you're telling me I'm some sort of accidental space mogul. Space mogul with a target on his back, corrected Colonel Martinez, the station's security chief, who'd been grimly silent through most of the briefing. We've already intercepted 3 separate assassination contracts posted to the dark networks. Apparently, making you instantly wealthy has made you instantly unpopular with certain factions. Which factions? Take your pick. Velnathi traditionalists who think marrying a human dilutes their bloodline, human supremacists who think you've betrayed your own species, and at least 6 different commercial interests who were counting on the Velnathi trade negotiations failing. Martinez pulled up a holographic display showing security alerts. The good news is that as Zara's claimed spouse, you're under automatic diplomatic protection. The bad news is that diplomatic protection only works if the diplomats want to protect you. Eric slumped into a chair. This is insane. 24 hours ago, I was worried about pronoun conjugation in Centauri dialects. Now I'm apparently married to someone I barely know and rich enough to buy my own moon. Actually, Chen said, consulting her data pad, according to the asset transfer documents, you could buy several moons. The Velnathi commercial empire is extensive. A chime from the office's communication system interrupted Eric's existential crisis. Ambassador Chen, came the crisp voice of her aide, Senior Trade Advocate Korvac is here to see Mr. Voss. He says it's urgent. Send him in, Chen said after exchanging glances with Martinez. Korvac entered like a man walking to his own execution, if the condemned was also furiously angry about the quality of the rope. His formal robes rustled with barely contained indignation. Mr. Voss, Korvac said without preamble, I come to offer you a way out of this situation that preserves dignity for all parties involved. I'm listening, Eric replied carefully. The Telvanni Corvith, while legally binding, can be dissolved without dishonor if both parties agree within the traditional waiting period. Zara was overwrought when she made her claim. Emotional stress from the negotiations, perhaps. Surely you understand that accepting such a bond would be inappropriate. Inappropriate how exactly? Korvac's expression suggested he was dealing with someone particularly dense. You are human. She is heir to House Velnathi, one of the most ancient commercial lineages in our sector. The genetic incompatibility alone. Genetic incompatibility. Eric stood up, feeling anger kindle in his chest. Are we discussing marriage or livestock breeding? I am discussing the preservation of bloodline purity that has maintained Velnathi commercial dominance for over 3,000 years. Korvac's tone grew sharp. Your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. What could you possibly offer that would benefit our house? Before Eric could respond, probably with something diplomatically disastrous, another chime sounded. Ambassador, came the aide's voice. General Morrison from Earth Defense Command is requesting immediate priority communication with Mr. Voss. The holographic display shimmered, revealing the stern face of General Morrison, a woman whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by her talent for making junior officers wet themselves with terror. Voss, Morrison said without pleasantries, what the hell do you think you're doing? Trying to figure that out myself, General. Well, figure it out faster. Half the Earth Defense Council thinks you've committed treason by accepting alien political authority, and the other half wants to pin a medal on you for infiltrating their power structure. Meanwhile, I've got 3 different intelligence agencies asking me whether this marriage is a legitimate diplomatic coup, or the setup for the most expensive honey trap in human history. Eric looked around the room at the assembled faces. Chen's diplomatic concern, Martinez's security paranoia, Korvac's aristocratic outrage, and Morrison's military pragmatism. Has anyone considered asking what I actually want to do? What you want, Morrison said bluntly, is irrelevant compared to the strategic implications. If you formalize this bond, you become a bridge between human and Velnathi interests that could reshape the entire balance of galactic commerce. If you reject it, you potentially insult one of our most important potential allies while looking like a fool who can't handle basic diplomatic situations. So my choices are marry a woman I barely know to serve political interests, or don't marry her and still serve political interests. Welcome to diplomacy, Chen said dryly, where all your personal choices have galactic consequences. Korvac cleared his throat. If I may interrupt this fascinating discussion of human decision-making processes, there is another matter that requires immediate attention. The assassination attempts on Mr. Voss are concerning, but they pale in comparison to the threats being made against Zara herself. Eric felt his blood chill. What kind of threats? The kind that suggest her sudden marriage claim was not entirely motivated by romantic impulses, Martinez said grimly, pulling up another security display. We've been monitoring communications since the incident. Someone's been pressuring the Velnathi delegation to withdraw from the commerce negotiations entirely. When they refused, the pressure became more direct. You're saying she married me for protection? I'm saying, Martinez replied, that a human spouse gives her diplomatic immunity that her own people can't revoke, and access to human security resources that would be much harder to infiltrate than Velnathi systems. Eric stared at the displays showing threat assessments, political analyses, and security protocols, all centered around a marriage claim made by a woman he'd met 3 days ago while helping her with a malfunctioning translator. I need to talk to her, he said finally. That may not be advisable, Korvac began, but Eric cut him off. Advisable or not, I'm not making decisions about my life based on other people's political calculations. He stood up, decision crystallizing in his mind. Where is she? Velnathi Delegation Quarters, Section 12, Chen said reluctantly. But Eric, be careful. Everything you say or do from now on has implications beyond just the two of you. As Eric left the office, he heard Morrison's voice from the communication system. Chen, what are the odds this kid actually knows what he's doing? Unknown, General, but given the alternatives, I'm hoping he figures it out fast. Eric made his way through Nexus Station's impossible architecture, past curious stares and whispered conversations that followed in his wake. Somewhere ahead was a woman who'd either saved his life or destroyed it by calling him her husband in front of half the galaxy. He was beginning to suspect it might be both. The Velnathi delegation quarters existed in what Eric was beginning to think of as architectural spite. Corridors that curved through dimensions human eyes weren't designed to process, decorated with art that seemed to shift meaning based on the viewer's emotional state. He found Zara in a meditation chamber that overlooked the gas giant below, sitting in perfect stillness, while Kepler 442b's storms painted aurora across her face. You came, she said without turning around. We need to talk, and I mean really talk, not the diplomatic dance we've been doing since you called me your husband in front of 300 witnesses. Zara rose gracefully and activated a privacy field that hummed with quantum interference. Very well. What would you like to know? Let's start with why. And please don't tell me it was love at first sight, because while I'm flattered, I'm not an idiot. For the first time since he'd met her, Zara's composure cracked slightly. You want the truth. I want all of it. She moved to the chamber's viewport, her reflection ghost-like against the swirling storms below. 3 weeks ago, someone tried to poison me at a diplomatic reception on Vega Prime. 2 weeks ago, my personal transport suffered a convenient mechanical failure that would have left me stranded in space. 1 week ago, I received a message saying that accidents could be avoided if the Velnathi delegation withdrew from the commerce negotiations. Eric felt pieces clicking together in his mind. Someone wants your people out of the trade talks. Someone wants the Velnathi shipping monopoly broken, and us removed from the equation entirely. If these accords fail, human corporations gain control of the major trade routes by default. She turned to face him. Marrying you gave me diplomatic protection that my enemies cannot easily circumvent, and gave you legal standing that makes you untouchable to certain factions. So I'm a human shield. You are a partner, Zara said firmly. I could have chosen any human for protection. I chose you because in 3 minutes of conversation about art and malfunctioning translators, you showed me more genuine kindness than I've received from most people in years. Eric studied her face, looking for deception and finding only exhaustion and something that might have been hope. What happens now? Now we decide. The bonding ceremony is tomorrow. The Galactic Commerce Consortium moved up the schedule to coincide with the final trade vote. If we go through with it, the marriage becomes permanent under both human and Velnathi law. If we don't, the Telvanni Corvith dissolves. I lose diplomatic protection, and someone probably succeeds in killing me within the week. Zara's voice was matter-of-fact, but Eric caught the tremor underneath. The commerce accords will fail, your human corporations will gain control of the shipping lanes, and thousands of worlds will find themselves cut off from essential trade routes. And if we do go through with it, then you become permanently bonded to someone you barely know, inherit responsibility for commercial interests spanning 12 sectors, and spend the rest of your life dealing with people who want to use our marriage for their own political gains. Eric walked to the viewport and stared out at the impossible beauty of the gas giant storms. You know, when I took this job, the worst-case scenario I imagined was accidentally starting a war by mispronouncing someone's name. Eric, Zara's voice was soft. I will not blame you if you choose to walk away. This is not your fight, and I had no right to involve you without your consent. He turned back to her, struck by the vulnerability in her violet eyes. What do you want? Not what's politically expedient, not what serves the greater good. What do you actually want? I want, she said carefully, to find out if the man who helped a stranger with a broken translator might be someone I could build a life with. I want to stop people from dying for corporate profit margins. And I want to wake up tomorrow morning without wondering if someone's going to try to murder me before breakfast. Those seem like reasonable goals. Eric found himself smiling despite the impossibility of the situation. Okay, I'm in. You're certain? I'm terrified, but I'm certain. Besides, he added with a grin, my mother always said I should find a nice girl and settle down. She just never specified what species. The bonding ceremony took place in Nexus Station's zero-gravity chapel, a spherical chamber where representatives from 47 species floated in carefully arranged formations, while holographic displays broadcast the proceedings across the galaxy. Eric, wearing formal robes that made him look like a refugee from a very expensive opera, tried not to think about the fact that billions of beings were watching him get married. The Telvanni Corvith, announced the Velnathi ceremonial speaker, binds not just two individuals, but two peoples, two futures, two hopes made manifest in the choice to stand together against the challenges of an uncertain universe. Eric and Zara floated in the chamber's center, hands clasped, surrounded by rings of light that represented the approval of their respective peoples. Well, most of their respective peoples. Eric could see Korvac in the human section looking like he was attending a funeral, while General Morrison watched from the military observers area with the expression of someone calculating strategic implications in real time. Eric Voss, the speaker continued, do you accept the bond of Telvanni Corvith with Zara Velnathi, knowing that this choice will intertwine your fate with hers across all the years to come? I do, Eric replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Though I should mention that I'm still learning to pronounce her last name properly, so this marriage is already off to an adventurous start. A ripple of laughter, or its equivalent, passed through the assembled delegates. Even some of the Velnathi traditionalists seemed amused. And Zara Velnathi, the speaker said, do you confirm your claim of Telvanni Corvith with Eric Voss, accepting him as partner in all things, equal in all ways, bound by choice and law? I do, Zara said, her voice steady and sure, and I promise to help him with that pronunciation. As the ceremonial words concluded, and the holographic displays registered the marriage as officially recognized by galactic law, Eric felt the weight of his new responsibilities settling around him like an elaborate, expensive cage. But when Zara squeezed his hand and smiled at him with genuine warmth, he realized that some cages might be worth inhabiting. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various other classifications, Eric announced to the assembled crowd, thank you for joining us on this incredibly surreal day. I promise to do my best not to accidentally destroy galactic civilization while learning to be a husband. The reception afterward was a diplomatic triumph, with even Korvac grudgingly toasting the new couple's happiness. The conspiracy investigation that followed was even more successful, with Eric's new legal standing and Zara's commercial intelligence network. They were able to trace the assassination attempts back to a coalition of human corporations led by Meridian Dynamics, the same company that had tried to manipulate the Korath campaign years earlier. 6 months later, as Eric reviewed shipping manifests in his office aboard the Velnathi commercial vessel Starweaver, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd come to Nexus Station expecting to translate languages, but instead he'd learned to translate between cultures, hearts, and hopes. "Husband," Zara said, floating into the office in the ship's artificial gravity field, "you're working too late again. Just making sure our new trade routes are properly documented. Can't have another interstellar incident because someone misfiled a manifest." Eric saved his work and turned to her with a smile. "How was the conference call with the Centauri delegates?" "Productive. They've agreed to the new shipping protocols, though they insisted on adding a clause about maintaining the cosmic harmony of commercial exchanges." Zara settled into the chair beside him, her pointed ears catching the soft light from the viewport. "Sometimes I think they make their contracts deliberately mystical just to watch other species try to interpret them. Better than the Rigelian contracts that somehow involve temporal paradoxes and require signatures from your past and future selves." Eric leaned back, marveling at how natural this had all become. The impossible ship that traveled between stars, the wife whose species he'd never heard of a year ago, the responsibilities that spanned sectors of space he was still learning to navigate. "Speaking of which, how's the investigation progressing?" The Galactic Tribunal issued their final ruling today. Meridian Dynamics has been dissolved, their assets redistributed to the affected worlds, and their executives are facing trial for conspiracy to commit interstellar fraud. Zara's expression grew satisfied. "Thane Korvac sends his grudging respect, by the way. Apparently, marrying a human who can untangle corporate conspiracies has improved his opinion of interspecies unions." High praise from someone who once suggested I was genetically unsuitable for his family line. "He's come around, especially after you prevented that shipping lane war by spotting the accounting discrepancies in the Andromedan contracts." Zara reached over and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "You know, when I made that claim in the plaza, I hoped we might be compatible. I never imagined we'd make such an effective team." Eric squeezed her hand gently. "Best accidental marriage in galactic history. I prefer to think of it as destiny